Okay, what I'm going to talk about today is something that I haven't seen a lot of people talk about, and if they have, not in great depth. This is the controversial notion that our glorious liberal elite, both in the UK and in what's left of the EU in general, um, is actually the greatest friend that the mad bad Russians could ever have. Now, this is a shocking statement, but I think I can argue it. Now, the Liberals. Now, what I'm going to say is, first off, it does not matter if the Liberals think that they are standing up against the evil Eastern Empire encroaching on their liberal utopian vision. Uh, as always, we judge the Liberals by their actions, not by what they say, and never by what they think they say, and never by what they think other people hear. We judge them by their material actions. So, summing up the undisputed weight of their actions, it's pretty clear that they've done almost everything in their power to help their blood-sworn enemies. Okay, so leaping on from that. And in many ways, the Liberals have this kind of McCarthyist paranoia that there are Russian traitors and assets and sympathizers all over the place. Staggeringly, they always blame their traditional political enemies for being in league with their military enemies, which is a little bit suspect. So, the classic example, Donald Trump was called a Russian asset, and there was no evidence of that. Quite the opposite. Aaron Banks was called, was it a pro-Russian state actor? I can't remember the exact words, by that foolish woman from The Guardian, Cadwallon, or whatever her name was. If you accuse someone of high treason and a serious criminal offence publicly, you better have your ducks in a row, particularly if they've got the money to sue. Okay? Basic journalism here. But moving on. So, in many ways, the liberal elite are more valuable to the Russians than a small army of traitors, because the liberal elite are the best enemy Russia could ever hope for. And what is the best enemy you can hope for? One that cannot fight. The Liberals do not know how to defend themselves. Okay? They're very good at grinding down on their own target populations, but that's about it. And I think they've obviously conflated the two. We've conquered all of our local institutions, and that makes us masters of the universe. Well, no, it doesn't. So, the first cataclysmic, catastrophic error the Liberals made is actually allowing the Russians to invade. Only very, very stupid people think that the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022 was a shock, spur-of-the-moment surprise. The Russians had been planning it for years. We know this because senior military experts and experts in Russia and the Russian military had been warning us for years. The Russians are building a damn war machine. They're going to push over and finish the Ukraine problem once and for all. The Russian army, I think it was in the middle of COVID, undertook a massive military exercise whose subject was solely the invasion of Ukraine. This is like a year before the real invasion. That's a not-so-subtle hint, isn't it? And the Liberals were warned, and they did nothing. Not a damn thing. And that is highly suspicious. Okay? I find that really, really suspicious. I mean, it either means two things. Number one, they've either been compromised by the Russians, or they're grossly incompetent. Probably both. I'll talk about Russian infiltration liberally in a minute, but, they let them in. If Biden had put a series of US divisions deep within Ukraine territory or within Ukrainian cities, I think that would have been enough to deter Russian invasion. That would have added a massive layer of complexity to the invasion, and I don't think the Russians would have gone ahead if they knew they were going up against the last remaining superpower, or there would be a risk that they would. I think it's too much. I think it was too great a risk for them. But that didn't happen. Ukraine was left to fend for itself. And the Liberals ignored all the warnings, all the telegraphings, all the speeches where Putin said, we're going in. And lo and behold, They went in, and the Liberals were all aghast and shocked. How could this have happened? Because you let it happen, my friends. Anyway, so that's the big one. They let the damn Russians in. The other thing is that the Russians have been observing the liberal folly across the globe really since the late 90s, and have deduced, I think, quite accurately that the Western liberal elite is pretty bad at fighting slow burn, insurgency-led conflicts. So that's Iraq and Afghanistan, a few other places, but those are the big ones. And it's a strategy that works. We'll just, boil the war down to a slow snail's pace, and the liberals will just fall asleep, or they'll, because they don't have any significant discipline, they'll just flop to the next trendy thing that comes along. Palestine, the war in Gaza, for example, is a classic example. Ukraine isn't cool anymore. Ukraine was so last season. Now it's Palestinians. And I said this to Ukrainian people. You will only be protected by the Western liberal elite as long as you're useful. When they find something more useful, you've never existed to them. Just like the war in Gaza, when something more useful comes along, they'll drop you like a sack of spuds. And so on, and so on, and so on. Okay? So they're just gonna, they know that the weakness is the slow burn conflict via increments, which is actually what Russia is doing. In the last sort of 18 months, Russia's made significant territorial gains all along the border, but you don't hear about that. And has cracked open a lot of fortress towns which were thought to be impregnable, but we don't hear about that. And of course, the other main thing is that Western liberal ideology has immutable, dogmatic tenets that the liberals cannot divorce themselves from to save their life. It is literally like a millstone around their neck, and imagine if they had to jump into water. They know they're going to drown, but they cannot amputate these failed concepts from their worldview. I mean, I remember a few days after the invasion, I think the then head of MI6 made a tweet, and it was the pride flag, and it was his words were along the lines of, "This is why we're going to win," or "This is why we're different." And I just thought, do you seriously believe that the senior Russian military and intelligence cadres are either going to be surprised or even impressed by you dangling a pride flag around, saying, "This is why we're better"? A 150 IQ GRU intelligence officer who's a fourth generation intelligence officer who's been trained really from kindergarten to slot into the family business. I don't think he's going to be knocked down by your cheap sloganisms. But of course, it wasn't about that. It was about the MI6 guy making himself feel better. And there are so many weaknesses they have. I mean, another classic one is this absolute pillar of their religion of no borders. I find this hysterical because we've had a lot of very, very suspicious explosions and fires all across Europe over recent years, usually involving industrial factories and engineering firms that make very specific, very niche equipment for cruise missiles and anti-aircraft radars and such, all blowing up for some reason. And a lot of people have said, this all looks like sabotage stuff, because this is very convenient for Russia. When you're building a new cruise missile and it requires a very specific type of software or type of chip, and the only factory in the world that makes it blows up for no adequately explained reason, cui bono, who benefits? Was it a sabotage team? Possibly. But you see, all that these alleged Russian sabotage crews have to do is get into the EU, and it's a free run, isn't it? No one will stop them. They're just getting a bus somewhere. Probably I do it for Turkey, but I'm sure they've got their own ways in. And no one will stop them. No one will check their papers. No one will notice them. No one will say, "Why are you carrying, materials specific to industrial espionage and sabotage. No one will stop them. And the whole continent is wide open. I think the Russians, if they really had to, I don't think they would do, but if they really had to start assassinating European leaders, they could kill thousands of them before anyone knew what was going on. They have complete free reign of the continent. I mean, how easy are you going to make it for these people? Now, we know this, and I've told liberals this, and they can't answer because they cannot adapt their core beliefs to the reality of the situation. It's the concrete blocks around. They got concrete shoes on and they're going to go for a swim. They know they're going to drown, but they can't take the blocks off. They can't change. Another crippling weakness they have is the obsession with net zero. It's called different things in different countries, but this whole carbon reduction plan, that's really thrown a spanner into the requirement to rearm the entire military base of the EU and European military base in general. We aren't making enough replacement equipment to cover all the losses that we've had in Ukraine. We should have. I mean, this is almost supernatural incompetence. There should be, at the very least in Germany alone, a war economy. There should be a large munitions and military hardware industry somewhere in the EU. But it's not there. Russia is out-manufacturing the EU by an extraordinary level. But they're just not building them. I mean, I did some research, something like in the UK, the most modern battle tank we have, the Challenger 2, I think, people are free to check me on this and correct me, but something like the last modern Challenger 2 rolled off the production line when Tony Blair was still in office. Before that, it's something like 2007, and that might be too late. We haven't built one since. And similarly for the Leopard 2 tank, I think the youngest Leopard 2 tank is about a decade old. Similarly with the F-16s, the last F-16 to roll off the production line was years ago. And it's not just building new bits of kit, it's all of the precision engineering and the knowledge needed to maintain them. So we burnt through our reserves, but then what? And they just cannot build a war industry. They don't even have the sense to realise, we've got a finite amount of military material, and the stuff that hasn't been destroyed is breaking down. What are we going to do? They haven't even got to that question yet. But they can't militarise because, that would hurt the earth. Building brand new factories that will probably take in more carbon than they admit, really. But no. They're against big business and big industry, so they've decided, sorry, we can't cross that line. More ironic, even so, is this instinctive pacifistic nature they have. Now, they're not they are pacifists, but they're not peace lovers. Western liberal democracies, particularly since the 90s, have been some of the most warmongering regimes in human history. But we're for the peace. And that kind of translates with a hatred and distrust of the military. The British military, for example, is all but non-existent at the moment. It's a shell of its former self. And that is coupled with the political elite saying, we must militarize, we must prepare for war. But we're going to slash military funding at the same time. We're going to force out all the talent. We're going to stab you in the back if you may or may not have made a mistake 40 years ago. Following orders from superiors who got away with it. Acting on bad intelligence that was probably supplied to you by higher-up traitors. We're going to do everything in our power to cripple the military, but at the same time, we need a military to defend us against the evil Eastern Empire. This kind of cognitive dissonance, again, it is proof of their deep, I wouldn't even call it psychological, instinctive weaknesses that are aiding Russia. And that kind of leads on with the whole thing about toxic masculinity. They say, oh, men being men is bad, it's evil, it fuels the patriarchy, girl power and all that shite. But you want to conscript teenagers, train them in all the brutal arts of warfare, and have them go up against an enemy that has been fighting this war for years, and you don't want them to complain if they get killed or their legs and their genitals blown off and they're rendered blind, deaf and dumb from, explosions and other all sorts of nasties. That's fine, Again, they will never get the hypocrisy of this. They will never get the cognitive distance of this. Because I've asked them over and over and over again, and they have nothing. It's turning into a rant. And the other thing, of course, is that the Liberal elite are morally corrupt and sleazy, which leaves them wide open to blackmail and bribes. And they're status-driven and profit-driven, and they'll just follow the money. Kind of leading on to that, the other thing is that our glorious Liberal elite, and this is one of their deeper weaknesses, this is one of the deep secrets of the Liberal elite. They're dumb. They're just dumb. Okay, now a lot of them are clever, some of them aren't clever, but the intellectual caliber of their groupthink is dunce level, moronic. And they always fall back on the groupthink when they need to rally, to push some policy, because that's all they have. Their herd mentality is low IQ, which means they are always going to be outsmarted and outmaneuvered by people who are cleverer than them, and the Russians are cleverer than them, because the Russians aren't dullards. If they were, they would have folded years ago. And they got all these, a degree in something like journalism or sociology from Oxbridge or whatever doesn't say anything anymore. I mean, if you watch the Oxford Union debates, and these are fascinating, especially with American visitors. Charlie Kirk was one I watched recently, and another good one before that was Ben Shapiro. Doesn't matter if you agree with them or not. The point is that they were in an arena where they thought they were going up against the intellectual vanguard of Western civilization, and they were dealing with a bunch of ignorant teenagers. Student union politics, for your local polytechnic, has exactly the same depth of insight into political views as these people have. They're just dumb. I think Ben Shapiro's face, if you watch it, is that he particularly with the abortion part of the debauchery of abortion, the abortion part of the talk, he was hearing the same lazy, shallow arguments from these Oxbridge intelligentsia that he had been hearing for 20-odd years. And when he gave the defeating counter-argument, they acted like they had never heard of it. That's how backwards they are. So they're dumb, they're dim. And that leads on to the fact that they fall head over ass for absolute red herrings. So the idea that, say, for example, the Russiagate hoax with Trump, that devastated the reputation of the FBI and the CIA. And even common sense would have said, well, okay, what's the evidence? What's the evidence that Donald Trump is being bribed or blackmailed by a number of post-Soviet intelligence agencies? Oh, there isn't any. Oh, there you are then. Your accusations are over. With Aaron Banks as well, with that Guardian journalist, it's not a contradiction in terms. I cannot understand how she thought she could, and the legal case is quite fascinating. There were numerous appeals, but it wasn't due to the substance of her accusations. It was whether or not she should pay any fines at him. But anyway, we digress. Because they've fallen for these obvious hoaxes, their lawyers and their insurers will be, or should tell them to be cautious about looking into these mythical Russian spies that are everywhere. And that, in a sense, helps the Russians, because if you are now squeamish about going after Russian spies, you might just miss a real one. Are there Russian spies in the UK and Western Europe and America? Probably. Probably not that many, but they're going to be in the places that are useful for the Russians. There is no utility in recruiting some internet YouTube commentator for being a Russian spy when you can go after senior civil servants, when you can go after senior engineers and industrialists who are going to provide, you with documents on the latest this, that, and the other, which will negate, Western technical superiority in whatever field. They're going to go after high-value targets. This is actually one of the things where, I remember some years ago, Jeremy Corbyn was accused of being a Soviet spy and asset. I actually spoke in defense of Corbyn. Not that I agree with him. I actually have met people who knew Corbyn in the 80s. He's not what people think he is, but that way. I said he's not a Russian spy, a Soviet spy. The Soviets wouldn't. He's too stupid. The Soviets wouldn't waste resources on recruiting him. In the 80s, he had no power, no skill, and he was He was a backbench MP, and I think he was a councillor for Lambeth or Islington Borough Council at the time. He was a nobody. KGB didn't waste his time with nobodies. They went after nuclear physicists and people who worked in military positions and things of that nature. They didn't go after freakish far left sad Marxists, because most senior KGB officers knew that Marxism didn't work. It's a psyop. But anyway, we digress. So the real Russian spies are not the political enemies of the liberal elite. The real Russian spies are in the liberal elite, because the liberal elite are the elite. They have the power. If the Russians were interested in recruiting people, they would be going after those guys, not the wild hill people on the fringes of decent society. So, in summary, I've gone on for way too long. The liberal elite of the West are the best friends the Russians could have, because they have weaknesses that the Russians can exploit. And these weaknesses are easier to engender than it is to recruit traitors. And I think it was Napoleon that said, when your enemy is busy destroying himself, leave him alone. And that's what the Russians need. They need the liberal elite to stay in power so that they can run rings around you. And I may get some comments from liberals, comment away, say, oh no, we hate the Russians, we're the real... Again, it doesn't matter what you feel or think. Your actions assist the Russians. Okay, that'll do.